May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable unto you, O Lord. This passage from John chapter 12 that we have today is, I feel, a positive one. It speaks to what we as Christians try to emulate in Jesus try to copy, try to follow in Jesus' example. Here we have Jesus speaking to a group of Greeks, and I know for the past couple of weeks I've been talking about how the writer of John had an agenda. You know, he's ministering to Greeks. So you have Jesus here saying, I'm going to die to produce good fruit in the world. And then John's like, and here are a bunch of Greeks that he's talking about, Greeks like you. So that's why that's there. But he's saying to these people who are trying to learn from him, I know that I'm going to have to give up my life, but my life has meaning. If I do good within the world, if I set a good example within the world, even if something bad happens to me, you are going to continue to do good in my place. And not just that, there'll be more of you to do good in my place. And so the gospel is trying to share with us this path to salvation, this idea that if one of us does good in the world, many others will learn from us. And if those people do good in the world, many more than them will do good from them, and it will keep multiplying and multiplying and growing until the entire world is saved. Isn't that great? Sometimes it's a little difficult, though. Sometimes we find it hard to find ground where those seeds can grow. And so we have here a recognition in what Jesus is saying of the challenge and also the reward that comes from trying to live into the example of God's love that he gave us. We, within this world today, do struggle, I feel, to live into that example, to understand what it is that Jesus is saying here. A lot of people read this passage and they're like, well, Jesus is talking about how we all have to get on the same page with Jesus in order to get saved and go to heaven and leave this world behind. A lot of people separate the language of this passage. It's speaking about heaven to the good works that we can do here on earth. And I think that within Christianity today, you'll find many congregations that are not concerned about doing good works on this earth. They're not concerned about the well-being of other people. They just want to know whether or not they've embraced Jesus so that their souls can go to heaven. I think that we need to ask ourselves, what does embracing Jesus look like? What does it look like to be the fruit that grows from the seed of Jesus' sacrifice? What does it mean what does it mean to be a part of that tradition, to be a part of the roots that grew from what Jesus did? I think that can be expressed in many different ways. You know, today I should have said at the beginning of service, thanks to everybody who brought a tent today. Because a reality of what people are going through here in Vermont this week is that a number of people are going to find themselves out of their winter housing and having to make do on the street. And so that's the reason why we had this sort of emergency shout out, go out to everybody through the congregation saying, if you can bring a tent today, then that would be greatly appreciated. For those of you that were able to bring a tent, thank you for letting your love shine in that way. But you know, not all of us can do that. My family wasn't able to procure a tent on short notice. But I think we have to ask ourselves, what are the ways in which we can be a part of that root structure, that tree of life that Jesus planted for us? You know, I wasn't able to give a tent, but I can bring the tents to Jump. I can let people know about the need. I can try to engage with people and expand my understanding of what people who are struggling with homelessness are going through. And I think that even if we are not able to engage with this particular effort to help people, there are other ways in which God calls us to do good within the world. It doesn't, you know, a plant has many branches. It blooms in many different, they bloom in many different ways. They're represented through different types of fruit. And all those things give something sweet to the world. And I think that what we see here in the Gospel of John is a recognition in part of that. The Gospel of John wants to share that mission with people outside of the Judeo-Christian tradition. It is a gospel that is in an in-between place between Jewish Israel, the Jewish kingdom of Israel and the soon-to-be Christian Roman Empire. And because it's not really in a place where it's rooted in the type of nationalism that represented religion in that time, I think that what we see in early Christianity is an emphasis on trying to be a religion for the people. And I want to put it that way because I don't think that the early Christians were not self-serving. I don't think they were selfless in trying to minister to the Greeks. They understood that in a time period where they didn't have a temple and they didn't have a nation state supporting them in any way, not to say that the kingdom of Israel really supported Christians that much very often, but where they didn't have a home to turn to, they needed to turn to other people who had power, who had the ability to step up and to build up their faith. And they made a smart bet on Greece and expanding the faith to the west towards Rome, where the center of power was. As we all know, that paid off very well for them in the long run. Maybe not well for our faith, but well for the people in charge by far. And as a result, Christianity is still is at this day the world's largest religion as far as people who say they are Christian. But are we living into the example that Jesus Christ gave us? That, I feel, is an important question. It's not how many checks you can mark off on a tally. It's, are we letting that love into the world? Are we fulfilling the mission? I think when we look at the harm that the church has inflicted upon the world through embracing power, embracing nationalism before God, we can see that those of us who call ourselves Christian do not always live into the intention of Jesus' sacrifice. We all sin. We acknowledge that at the beginning of our service. But are we willing to recognize that and change that and become good fruit? I think that we are living in a time where we need to acknowledge and point out the fruit of this tree that has gone rotten. We need to try our hardest to acknowledge the rot that exists within ourselves as well, and to embrace the fruit that is sweet and gives life to this world. We are living in a definitive period where I often tell people, you know what those early Christians were going through, you know how they defined the church for over 1,000 years. I think that we're living through a time period that's very similar. I think that the way in which we choose to live into that example of Jesus Christ, to live into that example of sacrifice, is going to define what Christianity is going to be for years, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of years from us. Sorry to put that on your shoulders. But it's a privilege. It's a privilege as well as a burden. The things that we do, I feel, will matter. Just as Jesus understood that the things that he did walking into Jerusalem would matter. People are going to look at us and they're going to ask themselves, were these seeds able to produce good fruit that faith can grow from? And if we are able to do that, it doesn't matter that our lives will come to an end. It doesn't matter that things don't always go the way in which we like. That example of love will live on beyond us. And so that's the message of faith that John's trying to give. That love, that example, that doesn't just belong to a kingdom of Israel or an empire of Rome. It belongs to people. It doesn't matter who you are, where you are in your life. It doesn't matter how you live into that example, as long as you're trying to bear something good and sweet and nurturing to the world. That lives on beyond us, and it gives other people the ability to do the same. Amen.